All right, advanced math. Going to work today. We've learned all these different measures of central tendency that can be used. Answers to statistical questions. We've learned mean, median, mode, range. Today we're going to talk about choosing the best one, or maybe best two, to answer a statistical question. So go ahead and mark your title, and when you're all done, close your math notebook up and concentrate with me on the I-dos. All right, so I want to give you a couple new vocabulary words here. They're not really going to be new. Maybe words I haven't used, but they mean something I have. So I want to talk about the word measure of central tendency. And I want to talk about the word measure of variation real quick. So the measures of central tendency, if you hear that word, that means mean, median, and mode. You know, they all kind of have to do with like trying to find the middle center sort of common part of the data. And so sometimes you hear those called measures of central tendency. And if you hear that word, I don't want you to be scared about it. It just means the mean. Those are the three things that are different ways to measure the central middle of the data. And then the only measure of variation, you know, variation comes from the word like vary, which means like differ, different. That's the range. So, you know, variation, like, you know, my test scores in math range from 80 to 90. There's a 10-point range. That's a measure of variation. How much do they vary? They vary from 80 to 90. You know, how big are they spread out? All right. So I'm going to use those words today. So those are our four possible answers to statistical questions. And so I want to talk about maybe how to kind of choose the best one. So let's look at this situation. Travis has taken 5 math tests this year so far. Here are his scores. And here are the scores. And the question is, which measure of central tendency, remember that means mean, median, and mode, or variation, that means range, best describes the data? So we're kind of saying, well, which one's really like the best answer to the question? Or maybe which two are the best? How would you go about picking the best way to describe this data out of all the ones we have? So I'm going to give you one strategy here, and that is Outlier Alert. Travis bombed one test and otherwise did extremely well. If you see an outlier, that's going to rule out some of the answers, and it's going to make some of them, as we talked about in the last lesson, really bad, right? So as you can see, Travis has gotten like A, and then like a bad F, right? So Travis is pretty good at math, and he just had like one really bad test. And as we discussed in the last one, if I find his mean score, 90, 90, 90, 100, and divide by 5, thanks to that one really bad one, his mean score is an 80. And that's just really not a good representation of how Travis did. Like, it doesn't, if you said, oh, Travis got it, all I told you, you couldn't see these, and I just told you, yeah, Travis's mean score is an 80, you'd be like, okay, Travis probably usually gets B's and C's, right? Probably has some B's, he probably has some C's. That's not at all what happened. So whenever you see an outlier, they mess with the mean so much that you're not going to want to choose that one. That's just, mean is, I would just, when you see an outlier, you want to throw mean out the window. It's no good. Same thing happens with range, right? We say, oh, well, Travis has a 70-point range. A range of 70 on his test. You say, whoa, he is all over the place. 70 out of only 100 possible points. Man, that dude is getting scores between 20 and 90, or between 30 and 100, or between 10 and 80. He's all over the place, but he's really not all over the place. Really, it's just because of that 30 that it seems like he's all over the place and his range gets big. But really, you would look at this and say, well, I mean, almost all his scores are within a little tight 10-point zone. So same thing, when you see an outlier, just cross the range out. It's not to say if you're asked to give it, you shouldn't give it. But when you have an outlier, mean and range just get really skewed, and they're not good answers to the question. So if you see an outlier, your best answers are going to be median and or mode. Now, mode is not usually a great answer because oftentimes mode's like, well, there's 2 out of 10 that have this. And that doesn't mean it's really a great answer to the question. In this one, the mode's pretty good. Since he got a 93 times out of 5, he pretty much gets 90s, and that would be a fair thing to say. So I think mode would be a good answer to this question. And his median score, you say, half the time he gets 90 or above, half the time he gets 90 or below. That's not a terrible answer either. So I would say in a situation like this where you have an outlier, usually your median or your mode or both are a decent answer, but your mean and your range are not. Mode is often it's very rarely are you going to pick mode as your best answer, but it was pretty good in this situation. All right, let me do another one before we do a couple together. All right, Stephanie wants to know how long most books are that 5th graders read. She asked 8 students how long the book they're currently reading is. Here are their answers. Which measure of central tendency or variation best describes the data? Remember, so that's mean, median, mode, and range. So when I look at this, I would probably not say there's an outlier here. There's nothing that's really far from the rest of the group. There's kind of a gap here. But when I look at this, and I think this is what you'd say, when you look at the length of these books that 5th graders read, they range a lot from pretty short to pretty long. And I think that's pretty true. And so when you look at that and say, really, there's not a single answer you can say 5th grade books are. They just range very far. And if you notice that, since they're pretty evenly spread out in the range, that makes range a pretty good answer. It would be a good thing to say, well, they're between about 200 and 700 pages, roughly. So there's about a range of about 500 pages. That lets the person you're talking to know, it's pretty spread out, which I think is true. So here I think range is a really good answer. Lots of times when they're really spread out and evenly spread out, that's going to make mean a good answer as well. So I might just add them up. 260, 317, 401, 409, 551, and 710. And that is 8 students, right? So divide by 8. Looks like the average is about 387. That's kind of right in the middle, so that's pretty good. And the average is 387, but they're really spread out. That would be a good way to answer this question. The median's going to be here. It's something like about, around 360-ish. That's a pretty good answer here. And there's not a mode, so don't worry about it. So when there's no outlier like this, really you can kind of use your best judgment and say, 360, 387, 500-point range. They're all good answers. They all are pretty accurate descriptions of the data. Okay? All right, let's do one together. Open your math notebook. Stephanie wonders how tall the players on the Atlanta Hawks basketball team are. She looks up their heights in inches, and here they are. Which measure of central tendency best describes the data? So when I look at this data, I see no outliers, and it's pretty evenly spread out. It's not like most of the players are 73 to 75, and then there's like 1 or 2 really tall guys. Anything like that. When I look at this, it goes from 73 to 84, and it's pretty equal. So when those are the case, range is a good answer. We would say here they range from 73 to 84, or, there's a difference of 11 inches. And that's a good thing to know. The Hawks, there's about a foot difference between the shortest guy and the tallest guy, and everybody is in between. That's a pretty good way to describe that data. Also, when there's no outliers and everything's evenly spread out, mean is usually pretty good. I'm going to pause and just calculate that for you. And there it is. That's your mean. So we'll say about 79 inches. And again, that's kind of right here. That's right in the middle. So that's a pretty good answer. When your mean's kind of near the middle, that makes it a good answer. The median, I think that actually might be the median too, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, the median's going to be right there. So the median's going to be 78.5. That's fine. Say, half the hawks are more than 78.5 inches, half or less. That's fine. And then the mode, I don't love the mode in this one. The mode is a good answer if tons of guys had the same height. Like if half the team was 77, I might say the mode's a really good answer. Or if like all but 2 guys were the same height. The mode's only really good if there's tons of the same answer. You know, this looks to be the mode, but it's still only 3 out of 14 guys. So we're to say, the best answer is the hawks are 77 inches. I don't know about that. So I probably wouldn't choose that one. Okay? You can pause and finish that up, and I'm going to move on to one more that does have an outlier so that you can have that in your notes as well. All right. So Kyrie wants to know how fast his heart usually beats. He counts the number of beats in 1 minute 5 different times during the day, and here they are. Which measure of central tendency best describes the data? So, Outlier Alert. When you have an outlier, it looks like he maybe took his heartbeat like right after he was sprinting at recess or something. It's extremely higher than the other 4 times he counted. So I have an outlier alert. Outlier usually means range and mean become skewed, we say. Like not true measures, not good. Bad answers. Because if I were to tell you the range, oh, well, he has a range, a big range. The range is, 110 beats a minute. You're like, whoa. I mean, sometimes it beats really slow, and sometimes it beats, that's a huge range. That's like 2 beats per minute difference. But if you look up here, really, like, pretty much, they're all really close. He just happened to also take it after he was running really fast. And that 161 is just not a good, it skews my range. It's also going to skew the mean. I'll calculate them. I'm going to pause and calculate the mean real quick for you. So there's your mean, 76.5 beats. You say, oh, well, his average heart rate is 76 beats per minute. And that's a terrible answer. His heart is only one time all day was his heart actually beating that fast. Once. So the mean just got skewed because of that one really fast point. And so no mean, no range when you see an outlier. Because that's just terrible. I mean, his heart never beats that fast. Once in the entire day. So when you have an outlier alert, you're going to usually choose median unless you have a very common mode, which we don't here. And you usually won't. You know, if I had like 51, 51, 51, 51, 161, the mode might be great. But here, so I'm probably going to choose the median, which is 55, and you say, half the time his heart rate's above 55, half the time his heart rate's below 55. That's probably the best measure here, thanks to the outlier. So there you go. So there's 4 kind of examples about how to choose the best measure. The biggie's the outlier. If there's no outlier, they're all going to be pretty good. And you can pick the one that you think's the most accurate after you actually calculate them and compare. If there is an outlier, you're almost always going to choose median unless there's just a mode that's really there a lot. All right, that is it for today. I will see you tomorrow.